Care on demand. For more information about us or to get in touch, please visit kmanvets.com. Kman Vets, where compassion meets excellence.
Buy and sell almost anything. Shop and buy new and gently pre-owned items. Declutter your home and earn some extra cash by selling unwanted items. ektrade.com, where Kman goes online to buy and sell.
The views and opinions expressed on Straight Talk with Austin and Ellio do not necessarily reflect or represent the views of Stingray Media, its staff, or contributors. Callers to the program accept full responsibility for the views expressed. The show host and affiliates are not liable for any statements made or any harm claimed. All callers to the program indemnify Straight Talk from all claims. Offensive, defamatory, or unlawful content will not be tolerated. Be a part of the conversation by calling 745-2626. Now, here's Straight Talk with Austin and Ellio on Bobo FM.
Hello, K-Man. I'm your host, Austin Harris.
And I'm Ellio Solomon, and welcome to Straight Talk, 89.1 FM.
Indeed. Welcome to what is our third episode. Again,
Time flies.
I know time does fly when you're having fun. And we welcome you, the listening audience, to another episode of Straight Talk with Austin and Ellio. The phone lines are open. 745-2626 is the number to call. We are also streaming live on YouTube at Straight Talk Talk Show, I think the name is, but certainly just follow that link to Straight Talk. Just search for Straight Talk or Straight Talk Talk Show. You can find us on YouTube streaming live. We are also streaming live via Instagram, albeit via a collaborator's site, a partner, if you will, in social media. You can find us by searching for The Rec Room 345. That's Rec, R-E-C, Room 345. And you can get us streaming on Instagram. We're also can be found on social media page of Facebook and just under the name of Straight Talk. So we look forward to hearing from you from a variety of platforms, but of course brought to you live here on 89.1 FM. Ellio, how was your day today, buddy?
Actually, it was yesterday. First, let me cover yesterday. Yeah, right. You got to contrast it too, Austin.
Cover yesterday.
I mean, after all, you ever look at a painting, you got to contrast it. It's like you see a painting with a little girl, it looks beautiful, but all of a sudden you paint the background black, it looks a little concerning. So it's kind of one of those. So yesterday, I did some pouring of a footing for a fence. Lots of work, 222 feet long, and but it's good. Keeps you in shape, especially when you get my age.
Sure,
So I'm happy to be out of the office. So don't feel sorry for me. I'm enjoying this.
I
Right?
won't.
Okay, great.
I won't.
And then today was a relaxing day. I got to do boring things like depositing checks into my bank account.
It's nice to be,
I've had this a very difficult day. Let's put it this way.
Well, to quote my favorite president,
Checks are heavy.
Yesterday was a bigly day for you, and today was a less than bigly day.
Oh, yeah,
for
yeah.
you, to
That's
quote
it?
good old President Donald Trump.
Okay, great.
And some of his choice phrases.
Donald has some choice phrases, all right?
He certainly does.
All right, well, he might be trying to buy Cayman soon. Who knows?
Yeah.
I heard he's trying to buy Canada.
So what's on the agenda today? I'll let you
let me
tell
lead, right?
folks today.
Yeah, so yesterday you raised the issue, and I think you said that there was a mover of the motion, Mr. Bernie Bush, and who was the seconder again?
Christopher Saunders.
Christopher Saunders. And you raised the issue about real estate agents. And I was asking the question, did we actually have a look at the motion itself?
Correct.
And the reason I was concerned about that is because I was trying to be able to use that motion then to be able to get a better understanding as to what they were trying to achieve from that.
Yes.
I mean, I think it's kind of obvious based on the discussion that you put forward that they clearly want to see more real estate agents, more Caymanian real estate agents. But kind of what's the impetus other than just trying to get Caymanians in there? So I was trying to see if I could read the motion to be able to ascertain that.
Yes.
And again, this is not to knock on anyone, but when I read this, I'm not necessarily sure it's any much more clear.
Okay.
Just to give you an idea. It says, whereas the Cayman Islands Constitution Order 2009, as amended, the Cayman Constitution affirms their commitment to being a country that respects, protects, and defends the environment and natural resources as the basis of its existence, Then goes on, and whereas the Cayman Constitution confirms our commitment to being a country that manages growth and maintains prosperity while protecting its social and natural environment. And whereas the Cayman Constitution affirms our commitment to being a country with an immigration system that protects Caymanians, gives security to long-term residents, and welcomes legitimate visitors and workers. And then it pretty much goes on to say, be it therefore resolved that the government considers amending necessary legislation and regulation to regulate real estate agents in the Cayman Islands. And again, it's a little bit, I'm sure we're hearing crickets?
Yeah.
Am I hearing crickets?
No, we have the fire alarm going.
Oh, it's a
right
fire
now.
alarm. Okay, the roof is on fire. Okay, well, we'll talk while the place burns, while the room burns. We'll be chatting in here. So if you listen to that, I think you can walk away saying it's not 100% clear, but you tell me, because you're listening.
Yeah.
Is it 100% clear exactly why you're saying we need the Caymanian real estate agents? Not that I'm disagreeing with it.
Right.
I think we need Caymanian real estate agents. It's just not clear there. Mm-hmm. And to try to spell out exactly what it is that I mean by that, it would be, to oversimplify it, it would be like simply saying, and whereas there is a fire alarm going on in this building,
Yes.
and whereas Austin and I are in here and concerned about the fire, and whereas we have a limited time to escape in the event that there is a fire, be it therefore resolved that all doors be open so those two poor persons can escape.
Well, I was thinking
It would kind of make sense, I think.
We're all good? Not, yeah. I was thinking back to the old Rooster days, and I was just, being nostalgic that we didn't have any windows or escape routes in that studio.
There was no way
either.
to escape.
We were locked in.
Yeah.
So, well, there you go. The alarm just gone off. I figure they're working on something in the building, and the fire alarm is usually the first thing that goes off. So everything seems to be okay. I just got given a thumbs up from some of the team outside. So.
Well, we've heard rumors that fire alarms is one of the mechanisms utilized by many employees when they want to leave work early.
Oh, who did that? Oh, shucks. Gotta go home. Oh, well, I hope they get that fixed tomorrow.
I don't, at 4:39, I don't see why that should be a reason unless it's someone on a late shift. I have no idea.
No, I'm willing to gamble. I'm not a bettor, but I'm willing to gamble.
You're not a gambling man, Austin?
I'm not usually a gambling man. But certainly I'm willing to gamble that we've got some technician, either the AC or maybe even the antenna being worked on, and somebody hit the wrong button. I'm guessing. Yeah. But that has been the case in the past.
Yeah.
But I'm not worried about anybody barbecuing you. So yes, please continue.
Well,
as you were saying.
As a part of this general sort of educational process, I mean, I'm pretty sure many persons out there may be aware of that, but if you're not, in terms of building the motion, you want to make it that those whereas clauses are building an argument. It has to build an argument that allows you to understand and justify why that resolve section is there. And so, again, it would be clear to say something like, as I was mentioning earlier on, whereas there is a fire alarm going on in the building, and whereas Austin and I are stuck in this room upstairs, whereas this may be a fire,
right.
And whereas we may need to escape as quickly as possible, be it therefore resolved that all the doors remain open. Something like that, because you can understand clearly then what the persons are trying to achieve, why they want the doors open.
So does a private member's motion that you have in front of you not clearly...
I don't know. I mean, I read it, and I think I can pick up something there, but it's not 100% clear. Okay. You know, like, why aren't you saying something to the effect, and not to keep knocking this, but why isn't it something like, and whereas there's 300 and something real estate agents and there's only, 3 Caymanians involved, and whereas we believe that this is not suitable and it does not allow, whatever.
Right.
Be it therefore resolved, we get more Caymanians in the industry. Right. Something like that, to me, would have been a bit more effective.
Right, I see.
This is something we're talking about the environment, the natural resources as the basis of its existence. Needless to say, a little bit nebulous, and I'm not quite sure how we jump to the conclusion, even though I am in agreement with the conclusion.
Right.
Right? I'm just not 100% sure that we're on board and how we got there.
Gotcha.
But either way, that is a motion, and we chatted a little bit about this yesterday. I definitely believe that there are many things that could be in this country as one of the means of being able to ensure that our people can play a role, is that there are certain jobs that I believe that could be earmarked for Caymanians. And there are persons who say, Ellio, well, that can't happen because you won't have proper competition. I can use the political arena, for example. Austin is a perfect example.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a job right now, I might stress, it's a job for now that belongs to Caymanians only. And I think we have a lot of competition every year. Mm-hmm. I don't know. There seems to be no shortage of competition for the 19 seats. I'm pretty sure by the time we're finished adding up, no, we're probably going to have near 100, maybe 100 persons running by the time you get to the 3rd of May. So, again, it befuddles me. I am confused by it, why we, until today, cannot utilize that amendment that at least says, here's a couple of jobs that could be earmarked for Caymanians, and make sure that they have an opportunity to get a job. We shouldn't have to be flying to England. I think I saw on someone's Facebook page today, I won't call her name, but the young lady actually posted, the new Caymanian dream is to go live or work somewhere else.
Is that what it is?
That's what they said. This is a young person, all right? So you're clearly not feeling like this country belongs to you.
Yes.
And like there's any real opportunities here for you.
Well, that has been said. That is a real feeling amongst, 18 to 23-year-olds in Cayman today.
Right.
They don't feel as if, there's a plan with them included as part of the future, nor sort of passing the torch as it was for every other generation, presumably before that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it was sad to actually read that, but it's a reality on the ground. At least at the minimum, it's somebody's perception. It is their perspective,
right?
And just that in itself is something to note and see if we can do something about it. But again, for the benefit of those persons who might not have heard me say it at least a few times, there is an amendment that was dubbed "Jobs for Caymanians Only." I think it was in somewhat Section 52 of Immigration. That is an amendment that allows the cabinet to be able to earmark specific jobs for Caymanians only. I think it should be implemented. I want to talk a little bit as well, Austin, about the political process, right?
Sure.
And there were some things, and I want to talk about the possibility of looking at making some changes in the system. Mm-hmm. This is perhaps going to be a radical idea, but I'm good at bringing up some radical ideas.
Okay.
If we look at the system right now of getting elected, my argument in short is going to be that it is a system that does not allow fairness, it does not allow equity, and it does not allow us to be able to really bring out the best candidates, to choose the best candidates.
All right.
And this is irrespective of whether you have the single-member constituency today or whether you have the multi-member constituency we had yesterday. It doesn't matter. I'm going to argue that what we're seeing, and even more so I'm seeing it in this election, is, and I think it probably started from the last one, but it's getting more and more obvious of how big money is going to be playing the role in the election. So let me start by saying this. Paint a picture of what it could be like and then come back to where we are.
But if I can understand you, your focus on campaign reform is campaign spending reform specifically.
Yeah. In this particular case, I want to see us being able to get an opportunity to be able to really select the best candidates, one of a more meritocratic system.
Right.
And I'm saying to you that I believe that big money in campaigns, money, period.
Right.
Money, period, but even more so big money, is playing a role that hinders that from happening.
I see.
So if we look at what, here is a scenario that I'll jump to the answer first, and then we can go back easily and look at the problem. I remember, for example, being involved in the campaign, and you would have debates, let's say Chamber of Commerce debates, and you have a candidate, for example, that doesn't show up at all. Mm-hmm. Now, think about this. Mm-hmm. How do you have a campaign where you're going to have a professional, organized debate by the Chamber of Commerce that where all of the voting public should be able to focus in on that debate and hear what their candidates have to say on the various issues that are affecting them? And then you have a candidate that doesn't show up.
Right.
But that's the candidate that's elected.
That doesn't show up to
the one that
debate.
Doesn't show up is the one that's elected. Well, I would like to suggest to you that clearly it's not the debate that's influencing what's getting you elected.
Right.
It cannot be that you had an opportunity to really hear and compare the candidates. Because again, it's one thing to get an answer. It's another thing to be able to have someone rebut that. So when you have that, I think it's fair to say, well, what's influencing this thing? It's not the debates. And I'm going to suggest that amongst other things, that it could be personalities and a myriad of different things, but one of the things that we can control that is within the sphere of influence of the government is the issue of money. Because if we just campaign at large, it's going to be a situation where the group that's spending the most money arguably can get in front of you the most. They can get the most radio ads. They can get the most television ads, newspaper ads, and just that alone dominates your thinking. You know, all I can see is, you know, I can see the color blue or the color green, whatever it is. And that is, I believe, having a very strong influence in terms of how people are actually getting elected. So a proposal would be is that I think we've probably reached a point where we should start to consider, hey, how do we perhaps take a little bit of the money out of the campaign, if not all of it, and be able to make it that you can have a series of organized debates where everybody gets a fair footing in an election, where people can now be judged not based on how much money you're spending, how big your platform and stage is, how much money you can hand out on the street, how many roofs you can fix, and the list goes on. What it's really going to come down to and be judged upon is I look at the candidates, I hear how they're speaking, how they deliver their arguments. I get to compare their arguments to the person sitting next to them, and this alone is what is influencing my decision in terms of who to elect. And I believe that such a system would be tremendously more meritocratic than simply a lot of spending of money.
Well, let me challenge the train of thought that is being put forward, because you raised the analogy of two candidates invited to a popular debate, but one of those candidates deciding not to turn up, but still ends up getting elected nonetheless. I put it to you that whilst campaign spending in some certain groups, usually the parties, because by nature they have more members and therefore running in more constituencies, therefore would be the ones to be seen to be spending the most money. And certainly under the previous yesterday multi-member constituencies that we used to have, bigger was always better. And to a large extent, it still follows through today because we still believe large crowds at public meetings really are the telltale sign as to who's going to get elected and who's going to win, etc. But since the introduction of single-member constituencies, I put to you that candidates have been very effective, some winning, some getting very close to winning, by taking the polar opposite approach, by not engaging in big campaign spending. Some in the last election didn't put up not one single billboard, but came within a mere 10, 12 votes of the eventual winner who was a part of a party. One will argue, well, clearly money was not the influencing factor in this decision. It just so happened that they missed the mark by a very small margin. And I say that to say that since the introduction of single-member constituencies, we no longer have to appeal to people on a broad district-by-district basis, but really it comes down to how good is your ground game. We made a move towards single-member constituencies, presumably from the basis that we wanted to shrink the voter base, the access between the man on the ground, the voter, and their would-be candidate. And of course, the candidate being able to see and visit and touch the flesh of a smaller number of people.
Yeah, they say it was to increase accountability.
Exactly, correct. So I would say to you that, and again, it's been proven, that in some cases, the candidate who focuses more on the ground game, more on the knocking on doors, more on the pressing of flesh, more on the yard meetings or the community meetings, and is less interested in the bourgeois, televised, traditional version of campaigning. They try a different tact. And again, in some cases they win. In other cases, they come pretty close to winning, so much so that we see some of those very same candidates throwing their hat back into the ring because they rolled the dice last time and came awfully close to, passing the line. Why not give it another shot again and maintain that same trajectory?
I have a smile because when you say came close, I'm thinking the Spaniards say, cerca pero no puro. Close but no cigar.
Close but no cigar.
So, But the thing of it is that, no, I agree with you. That is a very valid point. And if you recall when I was saying, I said it's one of the things that influences. And not the only one, but I talked about the money from the standpoint that it's very much easier to legislate that. You could get up tomorrow and say, you know what, here's what we're going to do to mitigate, reduce whatever some of this campaign spending. But you can't legislate the fact that Ellio or another candidate is going to get up, knock doors, and work really hard and get the game going on. So strictly, again, thinking about what is within the sphere of influence of legislators, I think it's just something to consider, because I think that where you may get a lot of those, as you brought it out, cercas pero no puros, close but no cigars. Bottom line is a lot of the winnings will go, and we know the power of money. We know the power of money on just about everything. I think in trying to move things to those candidates that might not necessarily be that well endowed, but at the same time wanting to be able to get the best persons that we can to serve on that board of directors that we call for Cayman Inc. or Cayman Islands Limited. You want to be able to get the best candidates. And quite frankly, when you can see, like I said, that you don't even get a chance to be able to compare the candidates and yet they get elected, I think just that in itself is a reason for concern. Because I am pretty sure that the well-intended candidate that you refer to, or the persons that you would have referred to in terms of that ground game, wouldn't, I would imagine, want to neglect having a proper debate at the Chamber of Commerce, right? You would very much engage in that.
One wouldn't, but again, there have been some
who did.
Well,
what do you think that is? Because let's have that discussion. Why would you want us to debate? Because you're not good at debating?
I really can't answer that question, because logically in my mind, I could never understand the reasoning for not doing so. But if I were to assume for a second, again, if I were that candidate who was more focused on the ground game, who was seeing gains in terms of how many people I'm seeing, if one meeting to the next, I'm seeing my numbers grow, not just in the number of parked cars in the parking lot, but the number of people I'm meeting, the number of people who are asking me questions, the number of people who show up to this backyard meeting, I may justify in my mind that my numbers look good. And of course, again, when we speak of numbers, it's a question of mathematics. If you've got 1,200 registered voters in your constituency and you're seeing 600 of them, a week, and you feel that, 80% of those 600 are in your corner, then you ask yourself, is it worth my while? Do I risk losing my popularity base
by opening my mouth,
or diminishing it further by engaging in another platform that really at this point I don't need?
But see, even there identifies an issue. Because if you're saying to me that someone is actually able to engage in a ground game, and I like that, sounds good. Yeah. We're in the ground game. Yes. That's very strategic.
Boots on the ground.
But let's understand this. What does that ground game involve? It would either have to be that your ground game, it could be a combination of all these three things. It could have several different permutations, but let's get it. It means that either it's engaging in money. It's a money ground game.
Sure.
Right? She needs her roof fixed. Some tiling. My friend here needs some blocks. So that could be part of the ground game. The other part of the ground game could just be pure personality. I know people and I just need to get out there and be friendly because I actually go to church with these people. I can tell this group that I'm family to them. However, it's a big personality thing. And what could be the other one? You could actually be having that you really have a really good argument. And you really want to say what you want to do, and you're doing it in a different way by knocking the doors and actually getting the message out that way. So I think it either has to be 1, 2, or 3, or a combination thereof.
Right.
But I would dare say that if you're winning on a ground game, then chances are there's probably a very good big leaning either on the personality side or the finance side. That would be my argument.
Sure.
And I don't believe that you get the best candidates by focusing on, he family to me,
Right. Right.
But me and him, I know he said that he right, and I can me and him went to school together. No, I really think you should be trying to pick the persons that are best for the job. I remember saying in one of the campaigns that if tomorrow we went out and we were trying to get a tiler for our house, we wouldn't just get up and say, Oh, we almost time for a break.
Yeah.
But we wouldn't just get up and say, hey, you know
2
what?
minutes to make your point.
Quick o'clock. So you wouldn't get up and say, hey, you know, I'm just going to go and grab the first person off the street that tells me they can do tiling. No, we would actually try to call our friends. We'd say, listen, do you know a good tiler? And then even when they told us, hey, I got a good tiler, we would actually say, really? Do you know this or you heard this? Mm-hmm. And they would say, come look at my kitchen. You see that tiling job? That's who did it. And then we would hire the tiler. But yet, we go to that extent to hire a good tiler. But on politics, where they're not going to be tiling our floor, they'll be making every decision that influences our life, arguably for at least the next 4 years, if not for the rest of our life. We don't use that level of scrutiny.
Right.
Just my friend that went to church with me.
Sure.
My schoolmate. Hey, me. And I actually had one person say, me and him smoked dope together.
Right.
And I said, and this was actually a business person. I said, really?
Let me ask the question very quickly.
Major?
We are running short on time. But when we talk about scrutiny, is it possible that one of the reasons why some voters don't scrutinize as carefully their next elected official as they would, for example, someone who comes to tile their home, is that the voter themselves are not educated enough on the wider issues that they would otherwise have a report card on their would-be candidate?
Very good question. It sounds like something we can discuss as soon as we come back from this break.
Okay, that sounds like a very good idea. You're listening to Straight Talk with myself, Austin Harris, and my colleague, Ellio Solomon. And I paused. I didn't wait for you. When you didn't jump in, I didn't say anything.
Go for it, man. Forget about me.
But we do have to pause. Take a short commercial, smart commercial break. Ready? Check in with the BBC News. But the phone lines are open, 745-2626. The first topic on the table thus far is campaign reform. Should that be just campaign financing reform? Or are there other areas of reform that you think should be introduced in the otherwise political campaign silly season?
Can't wait to hear from you.
Keep it locked. There'll be more Straight Talk still to come right here, only on 89.1 FM.
The BBC's From Our Own Correspondent.
In today's Russia, no one is allowed anywhere near the political stage if they pose a serious challenge to Vladimir Putin.
Stories and reflections from our reporters around the world.
There is a major sense of insecurity here.
More people are coming in from Sudan every day.
From Our Own Correspondent from the BBC.
The home of the BBC World Service. This is Bobo FM.
How can we understand the world better?
The BBC World Service is a window onto the wider world.
A vantage point from which to survey a new horizon.
News, reports, and analysis from around the world.
Stories we think matter.
Different people from different societies.
We get to the heart of global issues.
News, stories, and global perspectives from the BBC World Service.
The home of the BBC World Service. This is Bobo FM.
The BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
The BBC World Service makes programs with a uniquely global perspective.
Enlighten us. Where do we start?
The latest world news and current affairs.
The very best in global arts and culture.
What has been happening on the financial markets today.
Social issues, political stories.
Everything was there in a way that I never heard before.
The BBC World Service.
The home of the BBC World Service. This is Bobo FM. This is Bobo FM, powered by Doctors Hospital. 24/7 urgent care, located in Georgetown at the top of Walker's Road. Introducing the Doctors Hospital Specialty Clinic, conveniently located in the Strand. To book your appointment at Doctors Hospital, call 325-9000. Across Cayman on 89.1 FM, online and on your smart speaker. The home of the BBC World Service. This is Bobo FM.
BBC News with Sue Montgomery. Donald Trump has said he plans to meet Vladimir Putin in person, reversing years of US isolation of the Russian leader. His announcement came hours after he held a 90-minute phone call with Mr. Putin, in which the two leaders agreed to work closely to end the war in Ukraine. Samira Hussain reports from Washington.
Speaking in the Oval Office, Mr. Trump described his phone call with Mr. Putin as a good conversation. He said he believed with great confidence that the Russian president wanted to see an end to the war. The president also said he would likely meet Mr. Putin in Saudi Arabia, although when that might happen is unclear. In the 90-minute phone call, the two leaders discussed a range of topics, from the Middle East to artificial intelligence. But it is their exchange about ending the war in Ukraine that may prove most consequential. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky spoke to Donald Trump after his phone call with Vladimir Putin and described the conversation as meaningful.
The new U.S. Defense Secretary has warned Ukraine that its hopes of joining NATO and restoring its original borders are not realistic. Pete Hegseth told a meeting in Brussels of Kiev's allies that U.S. troops would not be deployed to Ukraine as part of any security guarantees if a peace deal is reached, and that Ukraine should end any hopes of joining NATO.
The United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. Instead, any security guarantee must be backed by capable European and non-European troops. If these troops are deployed as peacekeepers to Ukraine at any point, they should be deployed as part of a non-NATO mission.
The U.S. government is releasing a Russian convicted of cybercrime in return for Moscow's handover on Tuesday of the American teacher Mark Fogel. Alexander Vinnik has forfeited $100 million as part of the deal for his release. Vinnik was jailed last year after pleading guilty to money laundering through his cryptocurrency exchange. The head of the World Health Organization says a pause imposed on foreign aid by the Trump administration is having a serious global impact. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus urged the U.S. government to reconsider. He told a news conference in Geneva that programs to tackle HIV and other diseases had been affected.
The sudden suspension of U.S. funding and the sudden disengagement of U.S. institutions is also affecting the response to global efforts to eradicate polio and the response to mpox epidemics in Africa.
Donald Trump announced on his first day back in the White House that the U.S. would withdraw from the WHO. World News from the BBC. Thousands of teachers in Georgia have donated money to a colleague who was fined for protesting. The teacher was one of several activists ordered by a judge to pay almost $2,000, the equivalent of 4 months' average salary for a teacher. More than 7,000 tutors responded to a social media appeal asking for donations. The head of Austria's far-right Freedom Party has called for new elections, having failed to form a coalition government nearly 5 months after the last polls. Bethany Bell reports from Vienna.
The leader of the Freedom Party, Herbert Kickl, said the talks collapsed because the Conservatives were not ready to make compromises. He said he'd refused to betray his voters and called for swift new elections. The Conservatives have accused Kickl of being on a power trip. Austria's President Alexander van der Bellen said the country now had 4 options: new elections, a minority government, a government of experts, and another attempt to form a coalition. He said he'd hold talks with Austria's political parties to determine the way forward.
Lebanon's new president, Joseph Aoun, has said Israel must withdraw all its forces from Lebanon by next week's deadline. The agreement that ended the war between Israel and Hezbollah stipulated that the Israelis withdraw by the end of January. But Israel said Lebanon hadn't fully implemented the truce, and the deadline was extended to next Tuesday. The U.S. energy giant Chevron says it's laying off up to a fifth of its global workforce by the end of next year. A statement said the move was an effort to simplify the business. The layoffs are in line with a previous pledge to remove $2 to $3 billion in structural costs by the end of 2026. BBC News.
The views and opinions expressed on Straight Talk with Austin and Ellio do not necessarily reflect or represent the views of Stingray Media, its staff, or contributors. Callers to the program accept full responsibility for the views expressed. The show host and affiliates are not liable for any statements made or any harm claimed. All callers to the program indemnify Straight Talk from all claims. Offensive, defamatory, or unlawful content will not be tolerated. Be a part of the conversation by calling 745-2626. Now, here's Straight Talk with Austin and Ellio on Bobo FM.
And welcome back, K-Man, to more Straight Talk here on Bobo FM, where the time in studios now 5:06 is the time, and we continue our conversation. We now come to you with 53 minutes non-stop and commercial-free conversation on the topics that matter to you. The phone lines are open at 745-2626. Give us a call, share your thoughts, comments, and or opinions. The subject that we're presently on, that my colleague Ellio Solomon is presently leading, is the issue of campaign reform, be that campaign financing reform or otherwise. We really haven't had a chance to ventilate much of the discussion, just to sort of give you a mere taste as to what may come. But by all means, 745-2626, if you have a comment or an opinion on this subject, please don't hesitate, share those thoughts with us. We are also on WhatsApp, whilst we don't have an 800 number just yet, a toll-free number. If you don't want to spend your valuable credits on calling and perhaps potentially holding for a minute or two, though we hope to limit your holding time, you can send us a voice note via WhatsApp to 928-2562, and we will air your views and comments there. You can also find us online on streaming on YouTube. Straight Talk Talk Show is the search that you would put in, and you can find us there. You can also find us on Facebook, albeit not streaming live on Facebook, but you can share a comment or send a direct message via Facebook to us. Likewise, we are also on Instagram as Straight Talk, but we are being broadcast on Instagram, on streaming video Instagram, via a colleague and corporate partner, the Rec Room 345. That's Rec, REC, Room 345. If you just want to pick us up on your Instagram handheld device, you can find us at those locations. But I will now turn it back over to my colleague to continue making his broader point on campaign reform.
And answering one of your questions. And of course, all you people listening in the cars, want to thank you very much for listening in. Feel free to call if you'd like, 745-2626. And of course, spread the word. Let other persons know that Austin and Ellio, the dynamic duo, are here together.
Right.
Some people are worthy of waking you up, Austin, and some people are just so great you take them home with you.
That's right. That's right.
I think that's where two of us fall in.
Indeed. Well, arguably, we've ran both sides of the spectrum. We have in the past woken you up. Now we're trying to give you that cruise
taking you home.
You can enjoy that morning drive. You don't have to get stressed out before you go to work. And if you want just that little bit more of education.
That needs to be addressed. And your question just before the break was, and please, I'm going to try to paraphrase it, so you let me know if I get it wrong.
No, you do just fine.
But I think you were suggesting that the question that one could ask is, are persons in a position where they're knowledgeable enough to be able to make those sort of decisions in terms of who their candidate would be? Am I correct?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's right.
My colleague is looking very carefully at something on the screen.
Yeah, I did. Please lead. I've lost the screen.
Anyway,
here.
For those persons who may just be tuning in, a very quick summary. I was simply saying that amongst other things, I believe that we could look at making the campaigns a bit more fair for everyone and giving the individuals an opportunity who are voting, the opportunity to be able to choose candidates that are the best candidates for their country. And I believe that there are several different things, but a primary thing that is within the sphere of influence of any government in terms of being able to make it more equitable, make it more fair, make it more meritocratic, would be to limit the amount of money that you'd be able to be spending in the campaigns.
Right.
A proposal, again, is for things such as like how you have Chamber of Commerce debates. You could have other similar well-organized and properly structured debates that allow all of the candidates to compete on that platform, as opposed to going out and spending money and you getting one group getting elected simply because they're able to buy more ads, buy bigger platforms, buy more refreshments, and fix more roofs, etc. But if you could make it that you boil it all down to everybody listens to the debates and we make it an informed decision, being able to compare the candidates, etc., that would work better. My colleague raised the question, well, again, are persons in the position to be able to do that? Because I mentioned that someone had even told me, and this is real, I'm voting for this particular person because we smoke together. I'm like, really? And I was very surprised about that because, again, in this particular case, the individual was in a business.
Right.
So you kind of thought, I don't know if that's what you should be basing the decision on.
Indeed.
You know, I would think I would want to hear what the issues are. So to answer my colleague Austin question, I'd like to believe that people are. I think we just allow certain things to blur our vision.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I kind of know that this guy, you know, salesman, let me not call a name, is coming to me with a deal, and it really doesn't sound like a great deal, you know, but he's a member of my church, or, you know, he's my brother.
Mm-hmm.
So just want to kind of help him out. You know, whatever it is, we let that sort of emotion cloud our judgment.
Right.
Whereas, you know, if we really, and this is again where I think that if you do the campaign in the way that I'm proposing, possibly with those debates, you remove that proximity, because that proximity also creates a bit of a problem because it's a more emotional thing. Whereas if you're somewhat at an arm's length, a bit of a distance from me, I'm being able to sit and say, objectively, I've looked at these 4 or 5 persons, and I really think that number 3 is better, as opposed to number 5, which happens to be my family or a very good friend.
Right.
And hopefully, you would get a bit more of a proper and more informed decision-making process. But hey, I could be totally wrong. Maybe we need to keep it, you know, that lots of money has to spend, and doesn't matter if it's the right candidate, it's the brightest guy. Maybe somehow it's supposed to work that way. I have no idea. But from my personal view, I think, as I mentioned earlier on, if I'm going to take time to really choose the person that's going to tile my floor, because I don't want my floor mess up.
Right.
That's what we're saying. I don't want my kitchen floor mess up. This needs to be done well.
Okay.
I would think that you would take the same level of gravity, if not more, in terms of someone who's going to be making decisions on behalf of you, your children, and your grandchildren for a significantly long period of time. Just a thought.
Just a thought. Well, let me throw another thought into the mix. Would you agree when we look at the shortcomings, if you will, of our current election format and the platform on which election campaign financing is done? Would you agree that in some cases the high cost of running a serious election campaign would otherwise shrink the pool of capable individuals from even putting their name forward? You know, the intelligent person that would otherwise be, you'd think, you should run for office. I like some of your ideas. I like how you think. I like, you know, some of the conversations we've had. And that person will say, well, yeah, I would do so. But honestly, I don't know if I have $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 available to even begin to contest an election. So certainly an argument could be made that, you know, when we look at campaign financing reform, we try to make it so that we do not disenfranchise the really capable leaders from even participating, and that might be one of the reasons why we seek to, one of the objectives in seeking to address campaign financing.
Absolutely, and just to give one simple example to prove that point, nomination day is going to be the 3rd of March, which means every candidate has to find $1,000 and has to find 2 persons to sign on his or her behalf. Failing to get those things, you are not properly nominated and therefore cannot run in the election. Okay? Well, what would happen if the government just made it that you had to find $35,000? You would lose a lot of candidates.
Very quickly.
But you could see very easily now, if I had the right financier, well, doesn't matter. So I could technically go and just adjust that figure in the nomination. I'm so glad you raised it, Austin.
You're welcome.
You're like, oh, the light bulb's on today.
We're there, buddy. We're there.
What did you have in your coffee today, by the way?
It's just delicious, fantastic, good old-fashioned caffeine.
Good old, just regular good coffee.
Just regular.
I noticed it's black,
caffeine.
though.
It's black, definitely black.
Okay, so bottom line is, right, I could just up that number to 30,000, and I would probably eliminate 90% of the candidates.
Sure.
And really what that would mean is whoever's on the big ticket would guarantee almost to win, because you would remove competition.
Correct.
And just like how you could remove competition by changing the figure on the nomination requirement, I am arguing the exact same thing. Even though it is $1,000 on the nomination requirement, by allowing the money to be able to be spent, people need to understand this. You could spend $16 million before nomination day on the 3rd of March.
Yeah.
So if from the 3rd of March you spend 30 or 35,000, depending on whether you're a party or not, that's all that matters. As long as you spend that between the 3rd of March and the 3rd of April, or 29th of April, 2025.
Yeah.
But prior to that, you could spend 16 million. You know, and there is, so where you, to your point about the nomination, if we can agree that the nomination figure would immediately eliminate a lot of people, I argue that that also is doing the exact same thing.
Right. And I'm glad you used the example of 1,000 to the extreme 35,000. Would you agree, or do you believe a pay-to-play scheme of $1,000 donation? You want to run for office, $1,000, what you're going to come up, you pay this to the elections office. It covers the cost of your leaflets, the pamphlets, the laws that you're given, the training that every candidate is given after nomination day, the time to host the auditorium. Because all these things carry costs in which the elections office has to bear. So I believe the $1,000, the amount, the fee for running candidates to put forward, is a reasonable sum, and certainly does not necessarily deter candidates from stepping up to the plate. Would you agree with that or disagree with that?
I think it's a reasonable number. I mean, to me, it's a bit of a fine line, because one could argue that why we want that $1,000 is because, first of all, a lot of times people don't respect anything they don't have to pay for. And if you've got to find $1,000 and you're putting that kind of skin in the game already, you say, I need to take this quite serious.
Yeah.
Whereas if it was actually, just, $2, well, you could get a lot of people just registering, creating a lot of work for the elections office, and they never even campaign. Yeah. But you start putting $1,000 down, you start taking things a little bit more serious. But yeah, you can see where it's a fine line, right, in terms of what that number should be. But I would walk away saying I think $1,000 is fine.
All right. Well, certainly I would agree with you, and certainly when we look at some of the candidates who have consistently put up that $1,000 every 4 years, consistently, and oftentimes lose it
like a charity.
Really, it suggests that it is easy to come by. And again, if you are a serious-minded candidate, obviously you're thinking about this way in advance. So even if you don't have $1,000 in your pocket today, you can start saving, putting away for it
the next 4 years,
and whenever that time is, you can come up with. So I think we can agree that $1,000 entry fee, if you will, for lack of a better word, to participate, to contest an election, to be a candidate, is reasonable. Now, I want to pull up the elections law because I don't have it handy, but again, just going from memory, there is an election spending cap per candidate.
Yeah.
Is there not?
Yeah, there's an election cap insofar as candidates are concerned, whether you're independent or whether you're with a party, which again, that in itself is an issue, right? We have a lot of independents that are not too independent.
Right.
But I think the number that I remember last is $35,000 per independent, and then $30,000 per party member, right? But again, that only really comes into play after nomination day. Prior to that, it's just about spend. It's a free fall. You can spend just about whatever you want.
Yes.
So that's an important point.
Yes. But I think that, and again, that is the question, because certainly, when does the election law kick in? And to your point that you just made, the rules on campaign spending and expenditure, and of course maintaining and keeping records, all of that only kicks in after or on the day of
nomination day forward.
Nomination day, when you become an official candidate. But to Ellio's point, some candidates, and certainly some larger parties, are notorious for starting their campaigns earlier and starting their campaign fundraising machinery, activating that much earlier. And therein is where perhaps the $1 million figures that are talked about and tossed around during, voter conversations, if you will, and even amongst would-be candidates, it is the money that is raised prior to nomination day that nobody looks at. And the law does not recognize that as, the need to be transparent. You can raise as much as you like and have in your war chest, but you only have to declare, as the case would be,
after nomination,
those earnings and those expenditure after nomination. Is that potentially part of the problem?
Yeah, no, definitely part of the problem. And I think if we look at it and really try to analyze it properly, we see where there's a lot of potential issues here.
Yeah.
Because really, big money can take the day. I could take a group of candidates, arguably, that no one's ever heard about before. I can spend X amount of money. I can market and potentially get a lot of them, if not all those candidates, elected. And I'm technically buying a position where I'm going to get in with X amount of members and form the government. And I am not necessarily sure that that is the best thing for the country. And again, honestly, not trying to point fingers today at any one particular group that's running. That's not the intention. It's just a general discussion of something to note. And just to give you something else that I remember noting when I was running in the single member constituencies that would also potentially be money related, I found it rather challenging to be able to find certain spots where you could actually have a public meeting.
That's a very good point.
To actually be able to disseminate your message.
And that problem is compounded by breaking it up into single-member constituencies.
Correct, because I can't go now if I'm running in Georgetown West or Georgetown East and campaign in Georgetown North. That doesn't make sense. I need to be in that area. And I found that there was a very limited amount of spaces, and you need to ask yourself, what is that causing for the democratic process? If we were... Which is why I would look forward to the debates where everyone would be tuned in around the country, and hopefully specifically the particular constituency that I'm running in, so that they can have a chance to hear what I have to say. And that is also something that has to be addressed. And one thing that solves that problem too, Mr. Harris, is money, right? I mean, if you have enough money, you can pretty much pay a store to shut down and use their parking lot. But the actual candidate that probably struggled to find $1,000 might find that a little bit challenging. And what I also found interesting is that there were a lot of government and quasi-government instruments and institutions within the constituency that I ran that you couldn't use their parking lot because they were saying, well, we don't want to seem like we're... But I'm like, well, you don't have to make it just available to me. Make it available to everyone.
Right.
But this is a serious problem when it comes to, well, how am I supposed to get my message out here?
Yes.
Right? So if I can't get my message out because there's nowhere to pitch tent and have a meeting, then I guess I got to go on the radio. But they charge for the radio. But they charge for the TV. Oh, and the Compass charges too. So you're not getting any broadcast for free. So you're creating a system where money just wins the day. And I don't think that is in the best interest of the country. I think that there's a lot of hidden talent. There's a lot of abilities. There's a lot of genius out there, to put it quite frankly. But those persons may not necessarily be individuals of means.
Yes.
And if we can create an opportunity that creates a more level playing field where you do not advance, you do not pass go and collect $100 based on the fact that you have $1 million, but you actually make it that you pass go and collect a prize of winning a seat based on, wow, that guy might be from ABC, but in this one was working in DEF, but I'll tell you what, that guy held a good argument. And he spoke a lot better than the other guy, and the list goes on. And you're able to now walk away with a sort of global view on the 4, 5, 6 candidates running in your area. Where somebody actually has to sit there and watch and say, this person is telling me what he has delivered, and this one can't even don't even have an answer.
Right.
Right. I think we need to just make it a bit more of a meritocratic system. Just my hay for the day.
No, I appreciate it. And just again to round the corners of the case, maybe we talked about, there is a cap on the per candidate spend, and it's outlined in the elections law. I'm looking at the elections law 2017 revision. It is found in section 67, subsection 2, under the title heading Limitation on Election Expenses, subsection. Well, I'll read 1 and 2 because 1 is very short. 67.1 says, election expenses shall not exceed the sum stipulated in subsection 2. And subsection 2 reads, the maximum amount of election expenses to be incurred in respect of a candidate at an election shall be $40,000. So there is a cap of $40,000 per candidate. So if you're running, obviously, as an independent, you alone, $40,000 is your cap after nomination day. I think it's 35 days after elections, you're required to submit an accounting or a spreadsheet.
Must have changed that, because I remember it being 3rd and 35.
I believe so. I'm sure this is the amendment 2017. So
I haven't had my running shoes on for quite a while.
You were elected, 2009 to 2013, yeah? So it could very well have been perhaps even a lower threshold then. I'm just looking, again, only at the 2017 revision of the draft. But if you were an independent running just by yourself, $40,000 maximum you can spend. But even as a party, they're still also limited to $40,000 per individual. But where, of course, the party expenditure may seem to be more is, well, if you're running with 10 or 12 or 15 members or even 19, that money is collated, summarized, put into a single account. So therefore,
you get economies of scale.
Exactly. It looks like a lot more money, but in actual fact, it is still within the guidelines or the expenditure cap of the law.
But again, key is you can spend prior to nomination day, and that is not accounted for. And again, this is something, because to me, when you do something, you have to be aware of the risk. And this is where I alluded to something earlier on yesterday or the day before when I talked about PIRs or what do you call it? People-initiated referendums.
Mm-hmm.
You've got some extremely wealthy people in the country.
Yes.
And you cannot create a system where, I am Mr. So-and-so, I'm not calling any names. What is it for me to spend $2 million? Absolutely nothing. And I'm just going to decide to just market the hell out of it, and I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and I'll bring a PIR every week.
Yes.
And I'm going to get what I want.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm going to prey on the not so paying attention people or whatever it is. So whether you're talking about PIRs or whether you're again talking about campaigning, to me, we need to create a more level playing field, because here's what fundamentally I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And that is that there's some very good people out there that has something wonderful to offer to this country that are going to be denied simply because they don't have the money. And the point that you raised, on which I echoed and hooked my boat onto it, is the nomination fee. If you and I will disagree that the nomination fee should not be $30,000 because many people would not be able to find $30,000 to be a candidate, then I believe you should make the argument as well that you can't make it, that you can be spending $3 million in a campaign against someone who can probably barely find 25. Because chances are you're not going to hear him or her, but it doesn't mean that him or her isn't actually the best candidate.
Right. And again, on that point, under the current status quo, if your concerns are, of course, on the one candidate having a deeper pocket than the other candidate and therefore compromising the fairness of every candidate having the same fair, adequate opportunity to get elected as the next person, then I would imagine if we're talking specific campaign reform, we would then need to amend the law, amend the requirements to focus on when campaigning begins, period. Not just the official nomination day, because really where those financing comes in, where those financing questions come in, the unknown in terms of how much one group will have over the other, one individual will have over the other, does not come into play after nomination day, but it starts whenever you begin your fundraising machinery. And that happens oftentimes maybe the beginning of the year, January.
Yeah.
And then you start raising. So if the law was to be amended and we want to create a more balanced playing field, then the segment of campaign financing that we're looking at is the area that is currently shrouded in mystery, for lack of a better word.
I think there's probably several ways you could go about it. I mean, I think you could go to an extreme position. I don't really, extreme is probably not the word. You could go to one side, one spectrum. Let me use that word. You could go to one spectrum, or you could go to another, or you could go somewhere in the middle. So at one particular part of the spectrum, you could say absolutely $0 are to be expended until you are a nominated candidate.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point in time, then that's where you spend your cap of $35,000, $40,000, or $40,000. I think that's one position. Another position could be, it doesn't matter. There will be no spending on campaigns at all. You will participate in a series of public debates. And it is based on those public debates that at the end of the day, the public will make their decisions.
Yeah.
Which would, in my opinion, that's the spectrum part that I was talking about, I think would make it extremely fair for all candidates involved. Because again, there might be candidates that can't find $40,000. And therefore, they get drowned out. And how many of us have went and applied for a job or, whatever the team is, and you don't get selected, and you don't get selected for some very, very simple reasons. Some of the things that are outside of your sphere of influence. And in this particular case, I think it is something that we as a country need to sit, we need to think about it, and try our best to do something about it.
Yeah. Let me propose another deficiency that I think you will certainly understand and relate to, and I think the listening audience would certainly agree with when we use some of the popular nomenclatures that have been used to define this area, and that is the deficiency that exists in the conflict of interest, either real or perceived, as it relates to campaign donations from persons who have a direct interest in the matters that will otherwise eventually, if not presently, go before any parliament. And I'm talking specifically about what has been referred to as the development lobby. You've heard, we've had news articles just this in the last 2 years where, we see, media houses referring to, let's call it what it is, bought and paid for representatives who are least interested in seeing the pace of development reduced because they have been funded by the development lobby. And do you believe that, again, perhaps a more holistic approach to campaign reform when we're talking about campaign financing, not just on the individual, not just on the general cost of running a campaign and how that may be, may disenfranchise, newcomers to the platform, but also do you believe the conflict of interest that comes from special interested parties that may also add to the costs of the typical campaign and likewise disadvantage one group or the other? Because if it is all about money,
right,
and one group is all about development, you can see very easily where all of that development money is going to go to, and that will diminish the opportunities for fairness for others to compete at the same stage.
Well, I would say in a general way, I have to agree, because if we start off again with the same discussion we were just having, we are somewhat in agreement, I believe, if not in total agreement, that we see the influence of money and how potentially that will disenfranchise a good candidate.
Yes.
A good candidate, he or she misses it simply because of the lack of money. And you also use a good word when you talk about the perceive or the perception of certain things, right? Even if there's nothing wrong. And I want to stress this because when people hear the word lobby, oh, that's a bad thing.
Right.
But lobbying isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Not at all.
What is wrong with having, a couple $1 billion and me getting up and saying, let's just find something that we all agree with, that Caymanians should be fully employed. So you could have a person with billions of dollars that's funding a campaign with millions saying, I want you guys to push and get Caymanians all into jobs.
Right.
So just because they're giving money for candidates doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. But I think the difficulty there is that is something that is a bit more challenging to police. That is challenging to police. Being able to question, what was in paper was jobs for Caymanians. But I'm understanding there was a behind the in-camera discussion. You can't police it as well, but what you can police is simply a matter of saying, let's create a structure, series of public debates, well audited, well done, fair and equitable, and everybody campaigns there. Why? Because why do I have to spend money? Why do I have to spend money to get my message out? I mean, we got Instagram, YouTube, Facebook. I mean, we got everything on social media you can think about. The television has died. There's so much information now. I don't think it should be difficult to make those things. Now, the radio stations might like it. Some of the media houses might not like it because, hey, they just live for this year, this time of year, right? This is every 4 years they have to come to the watering hole. But for the benefit of the country, I think it is something that you could have those sort of public debates and discussions that would make things absolutely equitable. Because the whole idea of lobbying and who's lobbying, whose motives are good and which motives are bad, I think all those are a little bit challenging to police. Going through you'd almost have to have an accounting department just to deal with that.
Sure.
As well as the ethics department.
Sure.
But if you can simplify it and say, hey, it's very simple. For 4 years, you don't spend money on campaigning. If you're caught spending money on campaigning, you know, X, Y, Z happens.
Yeah.
Bottom line is your campaign will be 6 debates and you keep getting eliminated and whatever, or the public just hears you for 6 times and they'll make a choice based on your constituency.
Indeed. And I just want to take it back to your comment about, you know, the term lobbying, and it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah.
You know, the Encyclopedia Britannica defines lobbying as an attempt by individuals or private interested groups to influence the decisions of government. And I think it is in that last part, the influence of decisions of government. But that's not necessarily
That's not
evil.
a bad thing either.
You know, maybe you want to influence the decisions of government. For example, the anti-sexual harassment bill, now act, that was passed just last week, that has been decades in the making, at least 10 years, if not longer. But it started by lobbying.
Absolutely.
It is saying, you know what, this is missing from the framework, whether it be from our employer standpoint in the labor force, or it's missing from within government. And again, you know, not to put too fine a point on it, but we've seen certain members, you know, at least alleged of sexual inappropriateness during the last 4 years because of the absence of a sexual harassment law. So it's not an evil thing to lobby. It is simply saying, I have an idea. I see a need that is missing in our country. I see a need that is missing within our labor force. And maybe this need can be addressed through legislation. And therefore, you lobby your MP. And you can lobby at the individual level as a constituent directly to your MP, or you can lobby as a group. I just think in this country, we associate the word lobbying with some of the more nefarious things, i.e., as we just talked about, the development lobby. But again, I just want to premise, I just want to, you know, sort of say that development in and of itself is also not a bad thing. But too much of a good thing can be a bad thing, is the only point I think that has been made.
You can be a tree hugger to an extreme.
Sure.
Nothing can happen.
Sure,
right?
Absolutely. The economy that we have in this country has largely been built on development.
Yeah.
But I think the groups that are opposing, perhaps, overdevelopment are the ones saying development's not bad, but let's make it sustainable. Let's rein it in a little bit. Again, not an evil thing, but it is oftentimes associated with evil, or that other word that regular people throw around quite often. We touched on this on Monday, I believe, or maybe even yesterday, on this natural assumption that everyone who runs for office, or heaven forbid, everyone who wins an election, automatically goes from being a good man before they were elected to being a corrupt individual after they're elected.
Well, I'm glad you raised all that, because it goes to my point and to respond to your wider comments. You know, the thing is, lobbying itself, like I said, there's a saying out there that basically any word, especially if it's a Norman English word, which it means that, you know, two syllables or more, that you give to the masses, it automatically takes on what we call a pejorative connotation. It takes on a negative connotation for some reason. And nothing different when we hear something like, you know, influence the government. But I want you to understand that when you sit and chat, whether you're having a beer or not, or whether you're just sitting and chatting on the sidewalk with an elected member or someone who is running for office, well, you're technically lobbying right then. And you know what the guys need to do. When they get in, they're going to try to fix this. That's lobbying too.
Yeah,
you know?
Sure.
So lobbying itself is not bad. I think the negative connotation that we're trying to capture when we say it is the person who is trying to get something, influence government for something to happen that is not necessarily in the best interest, but more in their own personal interest, you know? And again, that you could probably have a weird scenario there too, because someone could be campaigning for something for their own personal interests, but it also has a wider interest as well. So it is something, like I said, it's much more difficult to police, but I think that we can take it from a position that when we engage in the debate style of doing things, I think you could create a bit more of a meritocratic system. I remember the story. I think it was, what's the guy that created the light bulb again? It's Edison or one of those guys. Either way, I heard the story. How true it is, I don't know, but I want to use it just to touch on this issue of reform.
Sure.
Where the mother apparently gets a letter from the teacher, and her son is sitting there because he was the one who brought the letter home. And the son says, well, Mom, what's the letter say? And basically the mother responds, well, the teacher says that you're too smart for the class. He says that you're too smart for the class and that I should engage in some homeschooling. And of course she does just that. And years later, apparently when his mother dies, this is again the guy who was the major inventor of the light bulbs, et cetera, et cetera. When he finally discovers the letter never said that. The letter told the mom that he was not a bright kid and there's no use for him staying in school, and sent him home.
Mm-hmm.
Now, she never read him the factual letter. She read him something different. She put something in his mind that was positive and ended up making him have a positive, an extremely positive influence on the world. And I believe it is no different with a lot of candidates out there. I think there's some people there with some very bright ideas, and they have the tenacity that it takes to be able to achieve those things. And many of them in this election, like elections in the past and probably elections in the future, God forbid, are going to be simply pushed aside because they didn't have enough money to buy a tall enough platform and to buy enough ads in the papers or on the radio. And I think that that's not just a loss to them, but most importantly, it is a loss to this country.
No, absolutely. Well, I think it's been a good discussion, and because the ultimate goal of ours is to educate, enlighten, and elevate, I think we need to summarize a little bit about some of the discussion points that we've been able to engage in so far on this topic and agree on. And correct me if I get them wrong. The first, of course, when it relates to campaign financing, as we've discussed, is the high costs associated with running a campaign may unintendedly shrink the overall pool of persons who would put themselves forward for elections, because to some, they may have deep pockets, and contesting a general election, like engaging in a people-initiated referendum, is fine because I've got the deep pockets and I can pretty much assure my outcome because I'm going to spend more than the next guy. Whereas the potentially ideal candidate, who voters might say, well, why didn't you run? One of the restrictions that diminishes that person from participating is the high cost associated with running a campaign. The second issue that we identified, again, the real or perceived conflicts of interests associated with persons making campaign donations with an express or an explicit expectation for a desired result. These are groups that would otherwise fund campaigns with the view of them winning and therefore changing, amending, or maintaining the status quo, because obviously it impacts their own personal interests, selfish or otherwise. And then the third, which I think we should really list as the first, is, as you talked about throughout, those with deeper pockets have the ability to introduce their candidates to the electorate pool more easily and with greater effect than someone who perhaps may not have such deep pockets. And this is simply knowing your candidate. And as Ellio pointed out, it's not just about the stage and the risers and the lights and the chairs and the venue having a location, but it's also other ways, other avenues in which we use a public resource to introduce the candidate to the voter. And that is, of course, radio ads, TV ads, and the like. And the expenses surrounding that will disenfranchise the voter from the opportunity to get to know the candidate, because that candidate may not have had the financial resources in order to make that possible. So those are the three otherwise condensed areas that we spend the better part of an hour talking about.
Yeah, but I think it's worth it. Absolutely. And I think we can continue to see where there's examples that can pile up. One of the things that you mentioned was the fact that whether in the single-member constituencies or in the multi-member or generally at large, that size of that crowd is important that comes to your meeting. And you have to ask yourself, well, why is that crowd so important? And I remember, and I spoke about this in one of the speeches I did recently, the issue of conformity. So there was a gentleman by the name of Solomon Ash that ran a series of tests. And what he found, basically what he was asking people to do was a very simple thing. He put a group of Confederates together. In other words, these were actors, and one person was real. And he had the actors give the wrong answers deliberately. And he was asking a very simple question. You had a line that might be 2 inches, another one that was 2 inches, and then the other ones were odd measurements. So all the person had to do was answer which lines were equal, which lines were the same. Very simple question requiring a very simple answer. But what you found is that pretty much 78% of the time, the real person would change their answer from the right answer to the wrong one, simply to match up with what the actors were saying.
Yes.
It's the power of conformity. And that's where that big crowd comes in. Because when you see this big crowd, you start saying, this looks like where my colleagues are going. So let's just say you and I are sitting in a room, I'm going for candidate A. You say, well, I'm going for candidate B. No, we start arguing back and forth. No, A is better, B is better. And for some reason, Austin is able to, let's just say, pay a couple of Confederates to walk into the room, 30 of them, and they all say, no. A not make it. A can't make it. B is the right guy. Well, 78% of the time, the guy who was arguing for A will start to change and say, yeah, maybe you're right. We'll go with B. Well, the media does those things. You could see where you could technically pay people $25 each to show up at a meeting.
Yes.
So all of these things, when I'm just opening a newspaper and all I can see is, the color gray or whatever it is, well, it's going to have an influence. And you have other things tripping in like conformity. So I think we can agree that there is a significant impact that comes from that finance value that's added to it. And we as a country, I think, owe it to ourselves to make sure that we're getting the best candidates. And in order to do that, we need to take a little bit of the gray out of the room.
No, absolutely. And I would just simply add to it, and this applies to everything, and we certainly hear it often, and especially even more so during election season. It is infinitely easier to identify problems in campaign financing or problems with anything. It is infinitely easier to simply highlight and address the problems than it is fashioning effective solutions that address that problem. And again, one of the things that makes Straight Talk different is our goal as part of the Educate, Enlighten, and Elevate. Not only do we intend to bring you thought-provoking topics like the one we're on right now that you don't hear every day, but you should be talking about, is to get the old brain matter, working a little exercise into thinking how much these issues play into my decisions when I go to the polls, how much these issues affect how I get to know my candidate, how I get to know the issues. Is it because of the financing, out-of-bounds financing, out-of-control financing, the deeper pockets compared to the shallow pockets? Or, and again, I go back to the or, because we have seen candidates take the current status quo, and this current status quo is, as you pointed out, we only seem to count the money we raise after nomination day, but no one pays attention to the money we start raising, whether it be 6 months out, 9 months out, a year out. All of that money is a part of the war chest and is then applied when the starting gun goes off, but nobody's looking at this side. Whilst that is all very true, I believe that with the introduction both of social media, as you pointed out, which is a free platform, doesn't cost me anything to set up a Facebook account, doesn't cost me anything to set up an Instagram account, Spotify account, et cetera, et cetera. And if I am campaigning to, in particular, the younger demographic who are not going to attend the meetings that the traditional 53-year-old average voting age in Cayman does, that may very well be my niche. Likewise, whilst a lot have criticized the single-member constituencies of today as opposed to the multi-member constituencies of yesterday, that, again, change is difficult for a lot of people. For some, they've embraced the single-member constituencies because the voting pool, the people who will decide their future, has shrunk considerably from the 7,000 to 9,000, say, for example, the District of Georgetown, to 1,200 in a constituency in Georgetown. They then choose to use what little resources they have in holding smaller, more intimate, more one-on-one sort of campaigns. And arguably, that has proven itself to be successful, because what is the common complaint or criticism, and again, this is a question largely asked of persons who have been in elected office, both you and I, and I've been criticized of it. I'm sure you have as well. Is that but I not seen him in 4 years. He not come by my door. He not come talk to me. The point is, the voter cares a great deal about that pressing the flesh. They want to see you, whether you take the time to come to their yard or you take the time to come to their community. But in some cases, and I argue in many cases now, it is of greater value to the voter the effort the candidate takes to go to them versus the lights, the glamour, the glitz, the money, the spend, the manifestos. All of that is important, but I will argue that maybe it's not necessary. And in the case of at least one or two candidates, and I say one or two because I don't want to identify them because they are candidates in this election, and I don't want to obviously give one side an advantage. But there are candidates who have opted for the Alan Jackson little bitty approach, and that little bitty approach has reaped solid dividends.
But you can see again. I would offer a little bit of a different perspective on the whole issue when
Please
you talk.
do.
Yeah, when you talk about a person getting out and pressing the flesh. I think that you can see even again where money plays a role in that, because if Mr. Harris here is working his 9 to 5 and he wants to run for office, everybody makes a sacrifice, but your sacrifice is a lot more difficult than the other guy who has several $1 million.
Sure, has all day to campaign.
And has all day to campaign. We can press a lot of flesh. So again, you can see where the finances would have a significant impact, again, giving you an advantage.
Sure.
And, I want to touch on some of the things. You talk about social media, you talk about single women constituency, and again, on the whole issue, touching the flesh. I think that we as voters, just to offer a correction there, and please let me know what I'm getting on the time. I see it looks like about 5:53 now.
Yeah, we got 6 minutes, give or take, just under 6 minutes before we have to take the news break. Yeah. You go ahead. I'll let you know. Don't you worry, Bobo.
Appreciate it, Bobo. Appreciate it.
Hey, don't you worry about it, Bobo. Bobo.
That Bobo is appropriate.
It's a very appropriate word.
So
this is a local channel.
But I think we need
local hosts.
I remember having.
Sorry,
that's right.
I digress.
I remember when I don't remember exactly when it was, but sometime during the time of myself being elected, we had a discussion / debate, if you like. I think it was at Harcourt Theatre. And that same issue came up about, touching the flesh, etc. And I think that there's a lot of emphasis that's put on that. And one has to ask yourself the question, why? Why are you worried about someone coming to your house? I know we can give a nice emotional answer.
Sure.
But what you're telling me, and I remember having a person say that to me as well. You say, hold on, so what are you telling me? That you would rather than me having been out there, pensions, no. Spend a little more time in the bar room, Ellio. Get out there and shake some hands. And I'm simply saying to you, if you had a company, Austin, and you had a guy that, I don't know, he was responsible for the technology in this room, and he tells you, well, yeah, I'm doing that, but I had to get out and press a little flesh, So I went down by the bar and had a drink. You're not hiring that guy. You're firing him. You do the same thing to your tiler, your plumber, your electrician, your accountant. So why is it that, again, the job that holds the greatest level of responsibility, the most important job, well, the last thing I want him doing is up in our office fixing problems and I don't see him.
Yes,
I mean, for God's sakes, come on. This doesn't make any sense.
Yes, if I can paraphrase.
Ellio, I know you work hard, but you didn't get out and press the flesh. You didn't go to that bar and have a drink with me.
To your point, you can be fired for doing the job you were elected to because you didn't do the job.
Get out shaking off hands.
Of shaking off hands and visiting homes and whatnot. And therein lies the challenge. Therein lies the thankless nature
Austin, I hear you.
of that job.
I hear you. And so I think that needs a little bit of a reform in our minds. I don't think that we should be, and maybe that's part of the educational process.
Yes.
I would encourage, at least from my perspective, for the candidates, not that you got incumbents and you have new ones. I would say, listen, please don't make it as a marker that the guy didn't stop by my house and shake my hands.
Therefore, you're not getting my vote.
No, this is a serious business here. We're not, again, like I'm saying, we're not hiring tilers, electricians, plumbers. We're hiring somebody even more important than that. We're hiring someone that, based on their decisions, will determine whether we can afford to get an electrician or a plumber.
Yes.
This is beyond now. This is beyond the simple-mindedness of, well, if he didn't come to my house, he not getting my vote.
Right.
I never see him.
Right.
No, you need to go to your way to say, let me hear what the candidate has to say, the new ones, what the candidate has done, the old one, etc., and make some really good, firm, and sound decisions.
Sure.
You know, you can't tell me that I just went around all day, I never did the squid, but hey, boy, that boy can shake a hand. Huh?
Yes.
And he bought everybody at this bar drinking.
Yes.
Come on.
I think you make an excellent point, but how it differs from perhaps the question of campaign reform versus the point you're making now is with campaign reform, obviously it requires the voter to have the opportunity to see, to hear, to understand what the candidate is saying. But the point that you're making, and it is a sound one, it requires the voter to examine themselves and their own expectations just a little.
Yeah.
Is it more important to see the candidate than it is for that candidate who you elected to be doing the job
doing something good
that you elected him to do or her to do, for example?
Yeah.
And I heard it often, and I'll say it quite clearly. Being a member of Parliament was one of the greatest experiences and opportunities of my life. I loved the job. I loved the work of governance. I loved the opportunities and challenges of, writing policy. But I did not like the other side of the coin that says, well, I don't see you. You didn't come knocking on my door enough, as if to suggest that seeing you and you seeing me is more important than me doing the job you sent us there to do. But oftentimes it is very much the case. And we have seen persons lose their jobs, as the case may be, on that basis alone.
And really what we are setting up as how much?
40, 30.
And
9.
what we're setting up as candidates or as electorate is we're really saying to our candidates, if you want to get elected again, you get into office and you come and spend time with me and my friends and drink and whatever else it is. But the last thing you do is lock yourself away and try to get something done. Make sure and come out and spend time with me.
Well, we do have to pause and take a short commercial break. Check in once again with the BBC News. But we want to hear from you, K-Man. 745-2626. Do you agree with anything that we're talking about, in part or in whole? 745-2626 is the number. Keep it locked. There'll be more Straight Talk still to come on Bobo FM.
The BBC's From Our Own Correspondent.
In today's Russia, no one is allowed anywhere near the political stage if they pose a serious challenge to Vladimir Putin.
Stories and reflections from our reporters around the world.
There is a major sense of insecurity here.
More people are coming in from Sudan every day.
From Our Own Correspondent from the BBC.
The home of the BBC World Service. This is Bobo FM.
How can we understand the world better?
The BBC World Service is a window onto the wider world.
The vantage point from which to survey a new horizon.
News, reports, and analysis from around the world. Stories we think matter.
Different people from different societies.
We get to the heart of global issues.
News, stories, and global perspectives from the BBC World Service.
The home of the BBC World Service. This is Bobo FM.
The BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
The BBC World Service makes programs with a uniquely global perspective.
Enlighten us. Where do we start?
The latest world news and current affairs.
The very best in global arts and culture.
What has been happening on the financial markets today?
Social issues, political stories.
Everything was there in a way that I never heard before.
The BBC World Service.
The home of the BBC World Service. This is Bobo FM. This is Bobo FM, powered by Doctors Hospital. 24/7 urgent care, located in Georgetown at the top of Walker's Road. Introducing the Doctors Hospital Specialty Clinic, conveniently located in the Strand. To book your appointment at Doctors Hospital, call 325-9000. Across Cayman on 89.1 FM, online and on your smart speaker. The home of the BBC World Service. This is Robo FM.
BBC News with Sue Montgomery. Donald Trump has said he plans to meet Vladimir Putin in person, reversing years of US isolation of the Russian leader. He said their first meeting would probably be in Saudi Arabia. The announcement came hours after Mr. Trump held a 90-minute phone call with Mr. Putin, in which he said they had agreed to work closely to end the war in Ukraine.
I think we're on the way to getting peace. I think President Putin wants peace, and President Zelensky wants peace, and I want peace. I just want to see people stop getting killed. We're very far away from that particular war, but that's a vicious war. Probably 1.5 million soldiers killed.
Mr. Trump also told journalists he didn't think it was practical for Ukraine to join NATO and that it was unlikely Kyiv would regain control of all its land. The head of the World Health Organization says a pause imposed on foreign aid by the Trump administration is having a serious global impact. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus told a news conference in Geneva that many of the agency's programs had been affected by the funding withdrawal.
A significant part of WHO's response to health emergencies in Uganda, DRC, Gaza, Sudan, and elsewhere is supported by funding from the United States. As we have said, we regret the announcement that the United States intends to withdraw from WHO, and we would welcome the opportunity to engage in constructive dialogue.
Donald Trump has complained that the WHO mishandled the COVID pandemic and relies excessively on American funding. President Trump has announced he wants to close the Federal Department of Education with immediate effect. Last week, he said he would use an executive order to do so, but he's acknowledged he would need Congress and teachers' unions on board to fulfill his campaign pledge. The move would return education policy to each individual state. The head of Austria's far-right Freedom Party has called for new elections, having failed to form a coalition government nearly 5 months after the last polls. Bethany Bell is in Vienna.
The leader of the Freedom Party, Herbert Kickl, said the talks collapsed because the Conservatives were not ready to make compromises. He said he'd refused to betray his voters and called for swift new elections. The Conservatives have accused Kickl of being on a power trip. Austria's President Alexander van der Bellen said the country now had 4 options: new elections, a minority government, a government of experts, and another attempt to form a coalition. He said he'd hold talks with Austria's political parties to determine the way forward.
BBC News. Thousands of teachers in Georgia have donated money to a colleague who was fined for protesting. More than 7,000 tutors responded to a social media appeal, as Rehan Dimitri in Tbilisi explains.
Thousands of teachers across Georgia transferred around 50 cents each to the account of one of their colleagues, Lado Abkhazava, to help him pay a fine for protesting. On Monday, Mr. Abkhazava, along with several activists, including internationally renowned Georgian jazz singer Nino Katamadze, were ordered by a judge to pay the equivalent of $1,800 each for picketing outside the house of an official. Mr. Abkhazava told the judge that he was a single parent with 4 foster children and couldn't afford to pay the fine, which is the equivalent to 4-month pay for a teacher.
The US energy giant Chevron says it's laying off up to a fifth of its global workforce by the end of next year in a bid to simplify its business. Chevron has a global workforce of about 45,000. The company joins a growing list of major US corporations laying off staff. Hamas has insisted that it won't back down, despite Israeli warnings that the group faces a return to war if it fails to release hostages this Saturday. It said it won't be swayed by American and Israeli threats and will postpone the releases due to Israeli ceasefire violations. Israel claims Hamas is responsible for any infringements. 2 men have been convicted in Germany of trying to blackmail the former racing driver Michael Schumacher. Schumacher hasn't been seen in public since suffering serious brain injury in a skiing accident 12 years ago. The men had demanded the equivalent of $15 million, threatening to publish photos and videos of the ex-Formula One champion. BBC News.
The views and opinions expressed on Straight Talk with Austin and Ellio do not necessarily reflect or represent the views of Stingray Media, its staff, or contributors. Callers to the program accept full responsibility for the views expressed. The show host and affiliates are not liable for any statements made or any harm claimed. All callers to the program indemnify Straight Talk from all claims. Offensive, defamatory, or unlawful content will not be tolerated. Be a part of the conversation by calling 745-2626. Now, here's Straight Talk with Austin and Ellio on Bobo FM.
And hello, Kim-Ann, and welcome back to more Straight Talk with Austin and Ellio, brought to you exclusively by Bobo 89.1 FM. The phone lines are open, 745-2626. Send us your thoughts, comments, questions. Do you agree with the subject matter that we are, again, engaging today? Do you have a thought one way or the other? Do you think the three basic points that we have hit on and been discussing are relevant, or perhaps you think otherwise? We want to hear from you, 745-2626. If calling isn't your thing, you can send us a voice note via WhatsApp by simply dialing sending that message to 926-2582. That's the number, I think. 928-2562.
Well, for what it's worth, on the WhatsApp side,
number.
Yeah?
Don't even know my own number. That's terrible.
Yeah, that happens. You don't have to call yourself.
I know.
Use that excuse.
My goodness. Where am I?
So I did get a text, and this one's from Leon Gold. He said, "Excellent show so far, give Mr. Harris my regards." So again, we thank him very much for that.
Thank you, Mr. Gould, for that. Certainly, I'm glad you're tuned in. And certainly, in large part, this conversation impacts you.
Yeah, well, people are listening at the end of the day, and we appreciate that. Yeah. Just one little bit of comment on the single-member constituency.
Well, before you go there, since we're talking about taking comments from the listening audience, got one WhatsApp comment. And by the way, the WhatsApp number is 928-2562.
Better write that one down.
Yeah, I better write that one down. It's only my number, but yeah, what can I tell you? You know, the brain doesn't always work. Mm-hmm. It just says it's a compliment, so we'll receive it. So good to have you both back on the air together again. Thank you very much, listener, for those sentiments and for sharing those thoughts with us. We feel the same way. I'm thrilled to be back with Ellio again. It's nostalgic. It feels like coming home.
Yep.
You know.
Well, I feel the same way, Mr. Harris. We're full of smiles. We're full of smiles, and again, we started back in November of 2006.
Yeah.
Worked at least 3 years together there.
Yes.
And both caught the same bus too.
We certainly did. We followed each other's footsteps one way or the other in more ways than one.
Absolutely. But on single-member constituencies, again, I've never really been a fan of the idea of the single-member constituency. I'm more of a national vote person.
Sure.
That's probably going to be my next public campaign. I think we should really move towards a national vote, and for a myriad of different reasons. And by the way, the idea of the public debates and stuff, I think, is something that jives rather well with the issue of national vote.
And I suspect you will get a lot of support from the otherwise wider listening audience in terms of
I feel there's a lot of support
towards national voting than it is single-member voting.
Yeah.
And if not national voting for everyone, then certainly national voting for what would be, quote-unquote, the premier.
And it was interesting when we had the Chamber of Commerce discussions a few weeks ago. The Deputy Premier, now Honorable Kenneth Bryan, actually said that he would like to see the country move away from the single-member constituency, which I found was odd.
It is very odd.
It was good, but the reason why I say odd, just to stress that, is because very seldom are you going to hear something or someone saying something that you could argue moves you away from something that gave you your advantage.
Yes.
And I think that he's doing that based strictly on conviction. That he sees a lot of the division. And I remember mentioning these things, and I'll mention just a few for a couple of seconds. My goodness, we're already at 6:10. See?
I know time flies when you're having a good time.
Oh, my. Anyway, if you look at single-member constituencies, we're getting a call?
We got a call on the line. Maybe stick a pin there, and let's hear from the caller first.
Go for it.
Good evening, caller. You're on the air.
Good afternoon, Austin. You guys sound like you needed a caller, so I'll give
we just, we're starting to get a little lonely, kind of worrying whether or not, this message is going over people's heads or not.
Yeah. So, Ellio was talking about a national vote.
Yes.
I like to paint a picture for you guys, right? So we have one man, one vote now.
Uh-huh.
What if every constituency set up what is supposed to happen at district council?
Yes.
And what if that district council does something within their constituency to put the best names of 2-2 head-to-head within that constituency? So you only have, in each constituency, you only have 2 people running.
Yes.
Right? So instead of going to a whole national vote, it can possibly leave the one man, one vote, but not have 4 people running one constituency. So the district council would be kind of put it to the community, okay, choose the best out of whoever would like to run, and the best out of them will end up being head-to-head too. Right?
Well, it's a system similarly used in the U.S. I think they call it bicameral elections, or I'm not quite. Yeah.
So you'd have some runoffs, basically.
Yes. You're weaning down what is otherwise the best choices you have leading up to a final general election. Not a bad idea.
Correct. So you can have the one man, one vote. It's just that if that was put in place, then what you would end up with then is some accountability.
Mm-hmm.
Then also what you'll end up with is possibly, even if you are a incumbent, if the people don't want you, then you don't get to run again.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that what you're proposing is something that's doable. Absolutely. Once it's done fairly, I think it can work. I will just add, and you don't necessarily have to stay on the phone for this, but if you can, if you want. But I just want to add that I think some of the issues that I see with single-member constituents are much broader than that. It's because even from a management perspective as well as a cost perspective from government, let me just give you one. When I was in office at that time, it was 2 members from Georgetown. And because Georgetown was at large, we had that 5, 6, whatever number of constituencies, arguably. It meant that if the government did one road in Georgetown and fixed it, both of us were happy.
Yes.
All right? Mm-hmm. We used one constituency office, we shared it. Now you've got 5, 6, or 7 areas in what used to be Georgetown. And every one of them have to have their own constituencies. So you're increasing the cost of doing business. In addition to that, you could run a road and fix it up nice in Windsor Park, but the guy in Georgetown East is still upset because nothing happened in Georgetown East. So you get all of these issues, which is, amongst other things, raising the cost. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I will find them. But it has increased significantly, the constituency offices now compared to what you used to have. So you have
I'm pretty sure it would, because, I mean, at one point you had 4 people sharing one office. Now each person want their own office, right?
Yes. Quite right.
So obviously, now the only place I think it hasn't changed, I suppose, would be East End, North Side.
Right. Yeah. Correct.
Yeah, and Little came out.
And then you also get management issues, right? Because again, from representative positions, bear in mind, and this was one of the things I said at the Chamber of Commerce discussion. A member of a particular constituency, you need to understand, and Austin even talked about just rubbing the flesh. You can stay in office by doing nothing else than placating that, let's just say, 400 voters. You can keep that 400 voters happy, and you will keep your seat. And you can have issues that are national issues that people don't want to get involved with it. It's too controversial. It's going to make them lose their seat. And I'll just stick with my little area. That's what keeps me elected. And so you have all of this, even more silos now going on, as opposed to people being able to address national issues. And we kind
of knew that was going to happen with one man, one vote, right? I mean, it was an argument when they were trying to put it in place that this literally would happen. So sometimes you have to be careful what you wish for. You just might get it, right?
Right.
So this is what we end up with now, and it's. The simple fact of the matter is, with this system, you can see that even if you have 4 people running in one constituency and one person's win, then you have to take into account that more voters didn't vote for that person that actually got in.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Right? So when you look at it like that, then you think, well, that person won with, the minority amount of votes if you take all the rest of votes that was given not to that one person.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So there, I have always seen a problem with it, and this is one of the reasons why I didn't support the one man, one vote. But again, be careful for what you wish for, you might just get it. And that's what we end up with. But I think it could be tweaked, as in doing something like what I said if it works out. Because then I think you have a little bit of accountability. You may not get to run in that constituency if the constituency don't want you. Then you, as a politician, will automatically know, well, I have to do X and X, or I'm possibly not going to be able to run again.
Sure.
Because if the constitution say you can't run, then you can't run because the constitution don't want you. They want this one is best of whoever, right? Which I think would possibly be a better system. The only other thing that I find that that needs to be done, I would support the premier's job, and I think that's one of the things that I think people are tired of, that you have to have a party and who's going to be premier and who's the best person for the job. So that has to be tweaked, I suppose. Maybe that should be something totally separate too. If you're going to run and say, I want to be the premier of the country, well, maybe that should be a national position vote.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Then that you choose the best person for the job at a national level. That we don't have the situation where we have now. I mean, it's a bit ridiculous, and that's why people boil it down to silly season, right?
Yes.
But this is the challenge that comes with that, and this is oftentimes something you see in the U.S. For example, in this particular case with Donald Trump, he's been very blessed, right? He gets such an overwhelming support. He has both the support of the House and the Senate, and he's president, over that. But here you could end up with a different situation too. You end up with a president sometimes who is a Republican president, but you end up with either the House or the Senate having a different mix, primarily Democrats, and he can't get anything done. So you could potentially end up with that same scenario here in Cayman. You could end up that the various constituencies have technically put in one party or three-quarters of one party, but yet the premier that's elected nationally might be of a completely different party. Well, one could argue he's not going to get very much done. And that is why I think, amongst other things, you would want a national vote where at the end of the day, everyone gets to choose, and you get those top 19 candidates that comes out on the top. Go ahead. The
only thing that boggles my mind, right, when I think about this, no matter what system you put in, right, the only thing that confuses me is that we and I watch and children after me and grandchildren, they're going to face the same issues, seems like, unless they're fixed. And we've been talking about these same issues. And everybody in there are Caymanians, and all of them in there must know the issues, right? Okay? So then you have to sit down and think about it. Well, why haven't we done anything about it? Right? So let's put the voting system aside and what they vote. They're all Caymanians in there. We all know the issues, and it's all Caymanians that basically have to worry about our suffering. Why haven't we addressed those issues in a meaningful way? And that is actually what boggles my mind, because when I sit down and look at it, I mean, realistically, if we look at it wholeheartedly, is Cayman really hard to fix? Are these issues really hard to fix? Shouldn't we be in a better stance than we are? Leaving something better for our children and grandchildren behind?
Would love to respond to that, because again, I agree with you. You would look at it from its macro level. You would say the issues really isn't that hard to fix. But one of the things that Austin and I were talking about earlier on is that, and I'm sure you're aware of this, the mindset of a lot of voters is, hey, you didn't get out and have a drink with me, you didn't come talk with me. It's almost like you're punishing people who are actually doing the work, and you're rewarding the persons who are just there and treating you like a nice friend, et cetera, when they're elected. And I don't see how that is going to cause us to advance as a country either.
Well, that is something that I mentioned yesterday in a terms when I said that we can vote for who we like, but we have to vote for who can actually do the job, meaning you can hire a gardener that you like all day, and he sit down on your coconut tree and drink coconuts all day. But you like him, and you get your yard cut. But you get somebody that you possibly don't favor too much, but the point is he come and spend 20 minutes or whatever, cut your yard and get out of there.
Gets the work done.
Get your job done.
Yes.
Right? So we have to choose on what we actually want. Do we actually want them? And that's why I kind of laid it also on the voters. And I said, you stop voting for who you like. You have to vote for someone that have real solutions. Because right now I'm looking at the table and I'm looking at it, and every one of them are talking about the same issues. Right?
Yeah, we know what the issues are.
Yes.
Yeah. So what are the solutions to these issues? Are you going to regurgitate the same solution that you said 4 years ago, 8 years ago? Do you have new ones? And if you didn't do it 4 and 8 years ago, why are you going to do it now? Right? And I pointed out, I mean, if nobody could sit down and take 5 minutes to write a letter to CUC to say, I intend to we're going to negotiate your contract, why should I give you my X? Right? You didn't spend 5 minutes. Why would I think that you're going to spend 4 years to do something positive?
Yeah.
All that kind of stuff is what weighs on my mind when I sit down and look at this, right? And again, it's more detrimental now because just look at what's happening with Donald Trump that we just talked about and what they're implementing. And if we think it's not going to affect us, we have a serious thing coming and we're going to be in a serious mess because that is trickling right now towards us.
Yeah.
And we just need to pull up our pants and the belt buckle and tighten that up and move forward in the right direction and take care of our people and stop sending money to other places. It's good to be charitable and it's good to help these people and that people, but I mean, you have people here that's suffering, right?
Yeah, it starts at home, they say.
Okay, so we need to start that first and get those things done and get our places in line. And I'm just tired of seeing people flying in here and doing better than my own Caymanians.
No,
right?
absolutely.
I've just looked and I had a conversation with somebody today that they put a job out on Works, okay?
Yeah.
And talking to him about it, everybody that has turned in for this job is coming from SciFet, right? Okay? That have taken all these stuff, and the job that they're applying for, right, is a gardening position, right? So they're applying for a gardening position. What are we doing to facilitate these kids in better positions? You know what I mean? They're 23 and 24 and 30 looking for these positions, right? And I'm saying to myself, nothing is wrong with this position, but shouldn't we have them striking for a little bit better? Shouldn't we open up the doors a little bit more?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that to me, it was kind of disheartening, really, right? So look at that and scratch my head. And these are all Caymanians, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
They're all Caymanians that are going down this road, and that simply tells me that we're actually not doing enough, if anything at all.
Right.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much. I just want to pick up on that last point as in defense of, say, work, for example. Because I knew during our administration, we looked at the work permit categories and we saw where the majority of work permits were going to foreign nationals. And interestingly enough, it wasn't in financial services. It wasn't in a lot of the white-collar jobs, but it was in some of the more vocational jobs. I mean, plumbers, mechanics, landscapers. A lot of these jobs are very heavily supplied by imported foreign labor. And therefore, the department, the Ministry of Labor said, well, we have X number of persons who are unemployed. These are the jobs that are in high demand, that are considered unskilled labor to a large extent, requiring some training, some knowledge, which we can provide and, give a hand up to our people. But more importantly, if the argument has been and always will be, how many work permits did we issue this year? And we look at that breakdown, then we see that the categories in which the highest number of work permit or foreign nationals or work permits are being issued are in these areas. That may very well be the motivation behind the Ministry of Labor, in putting skills training in place for these jobs for that reason and no other reason at all. Just in defense of the Ministry of Labor and otherwise. But I do agree with the caller, because I don't believe we should limit the pathways for success for our Caymanians to any one category or the other. We should have it all.
Where I remember, and I'm pretty sure it was while you and I were on the Rooster too, we brought someone on at one point in time that was talking about mentorship programs. I mean, where are all the mentorship programs? So where are the mentorship programs that's going to be to help get someone in the financial services industry, and the list goes on?
Yes.
We need those things as well.
Indeed.
I mean, and to his point, I think that's where a lot of Caymanians want to be, and where there's not an issue about doing gardening or anything else. It's like, hey, I don't think that's where they should be striving, is this point, and I think that we could do a lot more to fix the problems.
To the caller's other point, I asked a question, isn't Cayman, what does it take to run this country? And it's not that difficult. I read something somewhere, and I was lucky and fortunate enough to find it again. It says, if you looked at the Hansards, that is, of course, the minutes, if you will, for lack of a better word, of the meetings that take place in Parliament or the Legislative Assembly. But if you read through the Hansards from 1975, you realize that nothing much has changed in terms of the issues that we otherwise constantly argue about in the Cayman Islands then and now. In 1975, the top issues were the port, roads, education, protecting the interests of Caymanians. Sound familiar? Cayman Airways, the ever-popular political football, and high fuel prices, or the price of gasoline. 50 years into the future, arguably we are still fighting over many of these very same items, not least of which protecting the interest of Caymanians against a growing population.
Very, very good and important point, and even more important, because one could argue, well, those issues will always be there. But the fact is, the matter is that not very much has been accomplished, right? Because we could sit and say that, 20 years from now is nothing wrong with, again, being able to discuss education for Caymanians, and the list goes on. But we would like to be able to look back with our measuring stick and say, yeah, but we've made a lot of progress.
Yes.
There was only this, and now it's that. And again, I say, and I said this at the Chamber of Commerce Forum, when a person gets elected, there is a fundamental decision that has to be made. Do I want to do the right thing, or do I want to stay in office? And very seldom do those two things converge. Mm-hmm. And if you leave the candidate, or a lot of candidates to their own vices, they will sit and choose a decision to say, I'm going to stay in office. That's the most important thing. I have to stay in office. And I think that one of the things that blesses us is also one of the things that curses us. And let me just give it to you very quickly. You would sit and say, being such a small country, we should be able to fix a lot of these problems rather easily. But also being a small country increases the proximity between Mr. Harris or the candidates, the elected officials, and that same populace. And this is where I say, yeah, we need a lot of reform, but I want to say it respectfully, that we as voters need to change our way of thinking as well.
Indeed.
Because if we are going to keep rewarding people based on how much food they bought us, and, boy, he said hi to me in a crowd when I was with my friends, these peripheral things does not carry us in the right direction. We have to look at this job and see the importance of it. It is just as important as any other job, and arguably even more important. And so we have to be able to say, listen, I have to make the decision based on who I believe is best for the country, and not a lot of these other peripheral things, who had a drink and who said hi to me.
Quite right. Well, that unfortunately is all the time we have for today. I want to thank the one caller who decided to be a part of the conversation. But what I'd like to thank are the many listeners who chose to tune in, and hopefully were listening to the dialogue and the discussion, which today was focusing on campaign reform. But be sure to tune in to more Straight Talk every weekday, Monday through Friday, from 4:30 to 6:30 p.m., right here on Bobo FM. We have to go for today. I'm your host, Austin Harris.
And I'm Ellio Solomon, and we will see you tomorrow, 4:30 to 6:30, right here on 89.1 FM.
Fantastic.
The BBC on Bobo. This is the BBC World Service. Across Cayman on Bobo FM.